The wail pierced the heart of the city like a siren, sharp, raw, and unmistakably a child's cry. It was a warm afternoon in Riverside Park, the kind of place where suits shared benches with strollers and coffee cups outnumbered pigeons. The sun filtered through the sycamores, casting dappled gold on the paths below. Businessmen talked into earpieces. Joggers panted by. Tourists looked up and around. But only one man froze. He turned his head slowly, the phone still pressed to his ear. His voice, calm, powerful, used to commanding boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, broke mid-sentence. "I'll have to call you back." Jonathan Merrick, CEO of Meritech Holdings, angel investor, keynote speaker, billionaire, lowered his phone and stood still. His daughter, Sophie, age 6, was on her knees in front of the carousel, alone, crying. Jonathan's heart punched against his ribcage. He had turned away for only a moment. One call. One damn call. His assistant had flagged it as urgent. Something about the Tokyo merger. Sophie had been just 10 yards away, spinning in slow circles near the fountain, humming to herself. She always hummed when she was happy. Now she was sobbing, clutching her stuffed unicorn like a lifeline. But someone else had gotten to her first. A woman, tall, dark-skinned, with eyes like warm dusk, was crouched beside Sophie, speaking softly. Her braids were pulled back in a practical twist, and her clothes were simple. Faded jeans, a navy cotton shirt, a tote bag slung over one shoulder. Jonathan didn't move. Not yet. He saw the woman kneel fully, leveling her gaze with Sophie's. She didn't touch the child, just listened, nodded, then said something that made Sophie hiccup through her tears. The woman smiled. Sophie blinked, nodded back. Jonathan's feet finally moved. He approached cautiously, watching the stranger's every gesture. But his daughter wasn't scared. In fact, she looked calm now. She was perched beside the woman on the bench, her hand resting in the stranger's palm. She was alone, the woman said as he reached them, not standing, not flinching. "I stayed until someone came." Jonathan dropped to his knees. "Sophie, sweetheart, are you okay?" The little girl nodded and threw her arms around his neck, her body trembling with leftover fear. "I didn't see you," she whispered into his collar. "I looked and looked." "I'm here now," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "I'm sorry. I should have—" "She told me a story," Sophie interrupted, "about a rainbow that lost its colors, and how the moon helped it find them again." Jonathan glanced up. The woman was standing now, brushing imaginary dust off her tote. "Thank you," he said. She offered a polite smile, the kind given to strangers on elevators and late-night buses. Anyone would have done the same. "No," he replied. Not everyone would have sat beside a sobbing child, told her a story, held her hand. Sophie reached out again, her small fingers curling around the woman's. "Don't go," she said. The woman looked down, startled. She hesitated, then knelt once more. "I was just someone who happened to be here," she said gently. "But you're okay now. Your daddy is here." Sophie shook her head. "But you felt safe." There was a pause, long, uncomfortable. Jonathan cleared his throat. "I'm Jonathan Merrick." The woman met his eyes and something flickered there. Not awe, not curiosity. Recognition, maybe. but the kind that says, "I've seen your type before. You don't impress me." "Kayla," she said simply, "I work nearby." "Where?" She shifted her tote. "Office cleaning, a few buildings over on West 83rd. Jonathan nodded slowly. Her voice, warm, confident, didn't match the title she'd just given. There was something about her posture, her tone, the way she carried herself. No insecurity, no apology, just presence. Sophie pulled her close again, and something in Jonathan's chest cracked open. He didn't know this woman, but his daughter, the child he loved more than his own ambition, the only person who didn't ask him about earnings or exit strategies, was clinging to her like she'd found the missing piece of something. "Can I give you something?" he asked. "As thanks?" Kayla raised a brow. "No need." "At least let me walk you back," he said, standing now, brushing off his slacks. "It's the least I can do." Kayla looked down at Sophie, who was still watching her, like she held the stars in her hands. Then she nodded once. They walked the avenue in silence at first. Sophie told more of the story Kayla had made up. The moon had whispered to the rainbow. The colors had names, each one a feeling. Red was courage. Blue was truth. Green was kindness. Jonathan listened, stunned. He couldn't remember the last time Sophie talked so much to a stranger, or smiled so freely. Outside a low-rise building tucked between a laundromat and a Dominican bakery, Kayla stopped. "This is me." Jonathan looked at the entrance, a buzzer that hadn't worked in decades, a mailbox taped shut, peeling paint. In the courtyard, two boys, maybe 7 and 9, were building something out of sand, bottle caps, and a broken wagon wheel. They waved when they saw her. Kayla smiled. "My nephews." "Your kids?" Jonathan asked instinctively. "My sister's. She works 2 jobs. I do the nights." Jonathan saw the warmth, the joy, the kind that wasn't bought but built, and something inside him shifted. The penthouse he lived in had 3 fountains, a theater, imported marble. But it never felt like this cracked courtyard, where someone had drawn hopscotch squares in chalk. Sophie tugged his hand. "Can she come over someday?" she asked. "For dinner?" Kayla opened the rusty gate. "That's sweet, but—" "I'd like that," Jonathan interrupted. She studied him. He wasn't trying to impress. His shirt still held the faint crease of his phone. His daughter's tears stained his sleeve. His watch, worth more than her annual rent, was now slightly askew, but his eyes were earnest. Something in them had softened. "Maybe," she said. Then she walked inside. Jonathan stood there a moment too long. Sophie leaned her head on his side. "I like her." "So do I," he whispered. He didn't know yet that this wasn't a coincidence. It was a beginning. Rain drizzled gently the next morning, dotting the windows of Jonathan Merrick's car as he sat parked across the street from the office building Kayla had mentioned. He hadn't planned to be there. That's what he told himself. But his calendar was full of noise. Mergers, pitches, rehearsals for speeches he wouldn't remember. The only thing he did remember clearly was the way Sophie had clung to that woman's hand, the way Kayla told a story about colors and kindness with a voice made of calm and courage, and the look in her eyes, the kind of look that didn't ask for anything, because life had already asked too much. At 4:57 p.m., the back door to the building swung open. Kayla stepped out. She didn't see him right away. She adjusted the strap of her tote bag, wiped her hands on a rag she carried in her back pocket, and glanced up at the sky like she'd forgotten it could rain. Jonathan stepped out of the car, umbrella in hand. Kayla noticed him immediately. She didn't startle. She didn't smile. She just raised an eyebrow. "You lost again?" He exhaled a quiet laugh, trying to keep his hand steady. "I was in the neighborhood." "You were in the neighborhood of a supply warehouse and a 24-hour check-cashing place?" she asked, folding her arms. "You're about 30 blocks from your neighborhood, Mr. Merrick." He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he offered the umbrella, which she took reluctantly. "I could give you a ride," he said. "It's raining." "And?" He hesitated. "And I just thought, maybe you'd let me say thank you, properly. You were there when I wasn't." She tilted her head slightly. That landed. After a pause, she nodded once. The drive was quiet at first. Kayla didn't lean into the plush leather seats. She sat upright, alert, like someone too familiar with being watched in the wrong way by the wrong people. Jonathan tried not to stare, but he studied her in the rearview mirror every time he signaled a turn. "Do you always make up stories like that?" he asked gently. Kayla looked out the window. "Only when someone needs one." "And the moon and rainbow?" "Something my sister used to tell me. I just added some things. Made it Sophie-sized." Jonathan smiled. "She hasn't stopped talking about you." Kayla didn't answer. He didn't push. A few minutes later they turned onto a narrow street with cracked sidewalks and modest brick row houses. Some had flowers in the windows. Some had boards on the glass. Life, stitched together with what little people had. "That's us," she said, pointing. He parked. The moment the engine cut off, the silence deepened. It wasn't awkward. It was weighty, like there were things they both wanted to say, but didn't know how. "Would you like to come in?" she asked suddenly. Jonathan blinked. Yes, if that's okay." She shrugged. "You're just a guy today, not a billionaire." The courtyard was the same as yesterday, but wetter and somehow warmer. The two boys were there again, digging a trench in the sandpit. One of them looked up and grinned. "Auntie Kayla!" Kayla crouched and opened her arms. The boy ran to her. The older one followed, slower, with the dignity of a kid who knew hugs weren't cool anymore but still needed them. "These are my nephews, Marcus and Elijah." Jonathan waved. "Hey, guys." "Nice car," said Marcus, the older one, peering at it over Kayla's shoulder. Jonathan smiled. "Maybe I'll take you for a ride one day." "You'd better drive better than our bus driver," Elijah muttered. "She hits every bump like she's mad at the road." Kayla laughed. "Inside, boys. Wash up. Homework before snacks." They groaned but obeyed. The inside of the house was small, but it glowed. Warm tones, handmade curtains, a chipped mug with crayons in it, a shelf of children's books with corners worn down from rereading. The living room was modest, but it smelled of lemon cleaner and cinnamon. Lived in, loved in. Jonathan sat on the couch that had definitely seen better springs. Kayla brought him a cup of tea, served without sugar or apology. "No coffee," he joked. "Not after 3. I need my sleep." They talked about small things at first. The boys' school, her sister's 2 jobs, Sophie's love for painting, and her sudden obsession with astronauts. Kayla listened more than she spoke. But when she did speak, Her words landed like truths, long buried under boardroom presentations. "I used to think success meant big things," she said at one point, wiping a crumb off the table. "Titles, cars, buildings with your name on them." And now? She looked toward the sound of laughter drifting from the back room, where the boys were arguing over spelling homework. "Now it means no one goes to bed scared or hungry." Jonathan said nothing. His throat had closed. He thought of his penthouse, echoing, immaculate, and cold. He thought of the silver tray where Sophie's nanny left her organic kale crackers. He thought of how Sophie still talked to that nanny like an employee, never like family. Kayla caught the look in his eyes but didn't pry. Instead, she pulled something from a drawer, a framed photo. 3 women and a toddler, Kayla, her sister, and their mother, who must have passed, judging by the reverent way she handed it to him. She used to say, "Show me a woman's kitchen, and I'll tell you what kind of life she's fighting for." Jonathan studied the photo. The women in it had smiles that had survived storms. Kayla wasn't just surviving. She was anchoring. "I'd like to invite you to dinner," he said suddenly. "My place? Sophie would love it." Kayla hesitated. Then, "Family dinner?" He nodded. She laughed softly. "You know, I don't own anything that goes with a place like yours, right?" "Wear whatever you wore when you told my daughter that story," he said. That's all she remembers. The next evening, Kayla rang the bell of a glass-walled tower that overlooked Central Park. She wore the same jeans, a cardigan this time, and a nervous smile. Sophie flew down the stairs barefoot, nearly colliding with a security guard in her rush. "You came!" Kayla knelt just in time for Sophie to throw her arms around her neck. "I told you I would." Dinner was imperfect. The roast was overdone. The salad was too fancy for kids. Sophie hated the sparkling apple juice and wanted the regular kind. But there was laughter, and Sophie told Kayla about her school art show. Showed her every drawing on the fridge, including the one with a stick figure Miss Kayla next to a heart. Jonathan poured wine with shaking hands, not from nerves, from something else. Hope. Something about the way Kayla moved, calm, capable, real, filled the sterile apartment with something it had never had. Life. Later that night, as Kayla prepared to leave, Sophie tugged her sleeve again. "You should live here," she said matter-of-factly. Jonathan froze. Kayla blinked. "Oh, honey, I don't think I'd fit here." Sophie looked confused. "But you're like Mommy, only nicer." Silence, like a bell rung too loudly in a quiet church. Kayla didn't respond, but Jonathan saw the way her fingers tightened slightly on the strap of her bag. "I'll walk you out," he said. At the elevator, they stood side by side. "She doesn't remember her mother," Jonathan said quietly. "She died when Sophie was 2. Kayla turned to face him. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "I know," he said, "but maybe you filled a space we both forgot was still empty." The elevator dinged open. Kayla stepped in. Just before the doors closed, she said softly, "Don't forget to tell her stories, the ones where the moon helps the rainbow find its colors again." And then she was gone. 3 weeks passed, and with each passing day, the apartment began to change. Not all at once, but gradually, like sunlight creeping through heavy curtains. Jonathan noticed it in the little things. The fridge now had magnets shaped like animals and stars. The floor bore faint traces of glitter Sophie spilled during an art project, and there was a folded cardigan draped over the back of the couch. Kayla's. She'd left it the night of the second dinner, and somehow it had stayed. They didn't talk about labels. Not yet. They didn't talk about futures or feelings or the strange way time slowed down when she was in the room. But she kept showing up, not out of obligation, not for money, but because Sophie lit up when she did. So Jonathan kept the door open. One Thursday evening he found himself outside Kayla's building again, this time not in a suit, just jeans and a gray sweater. No pretense, no armor. He knocked. The door opened to chaos. Elijah was standing on a chair in the kitchen, holding a ladle like a sword. Marcus was chasing a dripping dog that had clearly escaped bath time. Kayla stood in the middle, covered in flour, laughing like it was the most natural thing in the world. She saw him and blinked. Then, "You're early." He smiled. "You said come by after 6. It's 6:03. "I meant 6-ish," she replied, brushing her hands on her apron. "We run on survival standard time around here." He laughed. "Can I help? You cook?" "Not at all." "Then go sit with the boys," she said, "and don't let the dog near the couch." Dinner was loud, joyful, imperfect. Jonathan found himself helping Elijah with fractions, watching Kayla dance between the stove and the table like it was a performance she'd perfected. It wasn't polished, but it was real. The kind of rhythm you only get when you love what and who you're feeding. At one point, Marcus leaned over and said, "You like my aunt?" Jonathan froze, a fork halfway to his mouth. Kayla, from across the room, smirked. "I think he likes all of us," she said casually. "Even the loud ones." Elijah nodded, satisfied. "Cool. Just don't be boring. We had a boring guy once. He brought asparagus on purpose." Jonathan grinned. "No asparagus." "Got it." After dinner, when the kids were busy with a movie, Kayla handed Jonathan a worn envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "My resume," she said with a shrug. "Figured at some point you'd try to hire me." He opened it. It was short. Too short. No college degree, a list of cleaning contracts, some part-time child-care work, but it was what she said next that hit harder than any credential. "I've read every night since I was 16. Books I borrowed, stole, found. I learned office protocols because I had to clean after people who didn't care enough to hide things. I can organize a boardroom or a birthday party. I don't need a title to prove I'm capable." Jonathan looked up at her. "You think I want to hire you?" She folded her arms. "Men like you usually do, when they can't find a better way to keep someone close." He exhaled. Then, slowly, "Kayla, I don't want to hire you. I want to invite you." She tilted her head. "To what?" He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the weight of what he was about to say. "To be part of my life, our life, if that's something you'd ever want." Her lips parted, and for the first time since he met her, she looked unsure. "Jonathan, people like me don't get invited to tables like yours." He took a step closer. "Then maybe it's time we build a new table." Silence settled over the room, thick but not heavy. Then Elijah shouted from the other room, "Auntie Kayla, he said the moon helped the rainbow again." Kayla turned, blinking fast. "I'm coming, baby." Before she left the room, she said just loud enough for him to hear, "Let's talk more about that table." 2 months later, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm. Taxi horns, subway groans, people chasing purpose with too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But in a brownstone in the Upper West Side, the one Jonathan used to call cold and quiet, something had changed. The entryway had muddy footprints. The windows had handprint smudges. There were shoes, children's shoes, lined up by the door. And in the kitchen, Sophie sat at the island beside Kayla, laughing as they shaped cookie dough into hearts and stars. Jonathan watched from the hallway, unseen. He'd made a decision, a big one. Earlier that morning, he'd finalized the paperwork for a foundation, the Kind Colors Initiative, in Kayla's name, a nonprofit focused on early childhood literacy, community care centers, and emergency support for single-parent households. When he told her, she didn't cry, but she did hug him so tightly he forgot how to breathe. Sophie's voice broke his thoughts. "Are you marrying her?" Jonathan blinked. "Excuse me?" "Miss Kayla," Sophie said, licking dough from her fingers. "If she's not my mommy, can she be my second-best grown-up?" Kayla laughed, glancing at him from over her shoulder. "Wow, second best?" Sophie nodded. "Daddy's best, but you're the favorite." Kayla smiled. "I'll take it." That night, after stories and bedtime kisses, Jonathan stood on the balcony with Kayla, watching the lights of the city flicker like stars that had wandered too close. "I used to think the city was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen," he said. "All these lights, all this power. And now—" He turned to her, brushed a curl from her cheek. "Now I know beauty looks more like you, tired but radiant, strong but kind, and full of stories about rainbows and moons." She touched his chest lightly. "You always talk like that?" "Only to people who make me believe in things again." She looked up at him. "You believe in us?" He nodded. "I believe in this, whatever it is, whatever it becomes." A long pause. Then she whispered, "Me too." Epilogue. The newspaper didn't write about the night Sophie cried in the park. There were no headlines about the woman who sat beside a child on a bench and told her a story about a rainbow. But in the Merrick household, that night was sacred, because that was the night something broke and something bigger was born. A family. Not out of blood, not out of plans, but out of choice. And sometimes the most powerful stories don't start with grand entrances or fairy tale beginnings. Sometimes they begin with a stranger kneeling beside a crying child and saying, "I'm here." And sometimes that's all it takes.